Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm delighted to be here with Reverend Duncan Teague and Dr. Paula Stone Williams to celebrate Dr. Williams' brand new book, As a Woman, What I Learned About Power, Sex, and the Patriarchy After I Transitioned. As a feminist bookstore, it is always a delight to talk about our many varied experiences of living within patriarchy and how our different ways of navigating this huge system can teach one another more about feminism, more about misogyny, and more about how we live more wholly together. So I invited Reverend Teague to be with us because his experience of living within misogyny as a queer and gay man is different from Dr. Williams, from my own. And so we thought this would be a really fun way to just dig into this really important book, which was just released on June 1st. It's already getting lots of buzz. Dr. Williams is doing a ton of exciting interviews, which some of y'all may have heard her on A1 today or on some other shows coming up. We love for folks who are at home to let us know where you're watching from. And we do encourage you to ask questions. So if you have a question, please just put it in the ask a question box at the bottom center of your screen, and I'll pop back on towards the end and we'll get to some of those. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Reverend Duncan E. Teague. He is the founding minister of the 3-year-old Abundant Love Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Southwest Atlanta, an African-American community. He has served on the UU Ministers Association Committee on Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression, and Multiculturalism. He can be seen as a guest presenter on Dr. Henry Louis Gates' The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song. He is a senior member of the Performance Poets, the Adoti Muse, a gay Negro ensemble. His narrative is featured in the award-winning book, a documentary, and stage productions of Sweet Tea, an anthology of Black gay men's lives in the South by E. Patrick Johnson. And he resides in Decatur, Georgia, with his longtime companion and husband and tech support tonight, David Thurman. So welcome, Duncan. We're so glad to have you.
It is so good to be at Charis again.
Yes. And the woman of the hour is Dr. Paula Stone Williams. She is an internationally known speaker on gender equity, LGBTQ advocacy, and religious tolerance. She is also a pastor and pastoral counselor in Boulder County, Colorado. Paula has been featured in the New York Times, TED Women, TED Summit, TEDx Mile High, Red Table Talk, the Denver Post, the New York Post, New Scientist Magazine, Radio New Zealand, and many other media outlets. Her TED Talks have had more than 5 million views. So welcome, Paula. We're so excited about this book, so excited to have you here, and just, really thrilled to dig right in. So I'm going to get out of the way and let y'all get into it.
Thank you, VR.
Good evening, Reverend Dr. Paula Stone Williams.
We can just go with Paula, okay?
I wanted to start off official, though.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the things I'm going to start from the end, because this book is going to carry you very far. I like your book. And I love your honesty and your humility in the book. So what is the next book going to be?
I really haven't thought that far. I'm a one thing at a time kind of person, and I'm more willing, able, certainly in my new life, to trust the flow of where it takes me. So I never thought I would do a TED Talk, let alone 2, 3, and 4, or that I would end up being a speaker's ambassador with TED, or on the content curation committee for TEDx Mile High, which is here in Denver. I never saw any of that coming. I didn't see the book coming. I have a life rights deal for a movie to be made about my life, which has now been kind of morphed into doing a short form 6 to 10 part television series that would be on somebody like Amazon Prime. I didn't see any of that coming. So at this stage, it's just all a holy adventure, I think.
Okay. And I will
Now,
tell you, like a friend of mine told me, get ready for the movie.
Oh, I worked in that field a little bit, enough to know. I was talking with the company that's doing it when I first signed the life rights deal. And I said, I do know that you will make absolutely everyone in my world angry, me included, at some point or another in the story. Because when you're telling a story, you've got to tell a good story.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends who was a screenwriter said, you have to grab the jewels and run. You just have to break the display case and take the high points of the life and run and turn it into a movie. And that's not going to make everyone happy. Not what I try to do in the book. In the book, I was very, very committed to accuracy and making sure I didn't put a single thing in there that I didn't have at least one other person to be able to verify.
I appreciated the support that your family has given you in their struggle. Who in your family is enjoying or supporting you in the book the most right now?
Oh, I don't know that, they're all such individuals. I think they all are having really a paradoxical experience right now of both great joy for me and great pain. Part of it is that it's my book and I'm the one doing the interviews. And so they just have to trust that I'm going to be fair in how I represent them. Now, everything I say in the book about any of them has been approved by them. I wanted to make sure that my family and I were on the same page as far as the things I wrote. But they really haven't talked a lot about it. We were together in Hawaii for my birthday a few weeks ago, and it really didn't come up more than a couple of times. And that was fine by me. That was absolutely fine. The book is mine. And it has been a difficult journey for all of us. Jonathan sent me a very sweet note night before last. He said, I realized when we were in Hawaii that we have achieved our new normal. And I think we all thought that would happen in about 5 years. And we're now, from the time we told the kids, 9 years in. And we all know we underestimated how long it would take to achieve a new normal. I mean, I exploded the family narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you transition in a family, your entire family transitions, and they didn't ask for that. But we've always been a family committed to being honest and trying to get beyond a surface community through chaos and emptiness to a genuine community level. And, this was no different. We just worked hard at it.
When I was reading your earlier story, I was curious if you had encountered any member of the trans community before the discussion about the lady in the drugstore. There's a woman in the drugstore who does not want that trans woman coming in the store because it's so horrible, this man in a dress and all that. And
oh, right. Okay. Yeah. From my my early adulthood. Yeah, I was about 24 at that time. No, I had no interaction with anyone who was trans at that point. Trans people are only 0.58% of the population now. And back then, there just weren't many who were out. So I did not have that pleasure. I wish I had been able to meet her. Remember, her first name was Peggy. And I don't even know if she's still with us on Earth now. She was a good bit older than I am. But I wonder if she's still with us.
so you
I did
only got
watch
to
her
know
from
Peggy
afar.
from the not
Only
so nice
from
cashier.
She was an insurance agent, and I knew her through a few people who were her clients who spoke of her positively.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a pastor's wife, an evangelical pastor's wife, who spoke rather negatively of her.
We are both preachers' children.
We are.
Yes, we are. And we both ended up in the family business. I know. And I'm curious if you want to say something to those children out there whose parents are spiritual leaders and who are facing, their authenticity as you talk about it.
I think to those children, adolescents, I would say be brave and find someone with whom you can tell your truth, to whom you can tell your truth, and with whom you can speak about it. I did not have anyone. Not until I was in college did I have anyone. And if I just had had one person, if an aunt had given me a signal, or my grandmother, and of course, again, back then, nobody knew anything. I think today it would be somewhat different. But I say to those kids, you probably intuitively know who might be willing to receive this information. And go to that person, not to the ones who won't receive it. I knew it would not be well received by my mother. I think actually if it had only been my father and me and my brother, I probably would have gone to him fairly early, because my father was a very, very generous man.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he was a fundamentalist pastor, I knew, for instance, that in his heart of hearts, he did not believe in the Christian doctrine of the substitutionary atonement, that God basically can't stand us unless Jesus steps in to stop God from sending us to hell. Because Dad treated everyone as if they were loved by God just as they were. So the way he treated people did not necessarily agree with his doctrinal positions. And of course, you're a child, so you're noticing that. My mother, on the other hand, was a very strict fundamentalist and also had a lot of control over my father. So there was no way she ever would have responded in any kind of a positive way to that information, nor would she have allowed him to talk with me about it. And if I had told him, he would have gone straight to her. It's just who he was.
You are getting a lot of love in the chat, and some of it is from Alabama and from Colorado in your church. I just want you to know that if you can't see it. Because I want to have fun, because you have too many of these interviews to do.
Fun is good.
Yes.
This is the last one today.
About fun, what part of the book are you most proud of?
Oh, I like that question. I consistently go back to chapters, to the introduction, and chapter 15, Dying Before Dying, which is kind of the end of the sequential part of the book, and chapter 21, which is a short chapter at the very end of the book. I think those are the ones that are my favorites. There are some others that are deeply, deeply meaningful to me.
I'm going to ask why 21 is in the list.
I think it's all about the Cath Kidston mug that broke and shattered on the floor. That still sits on my bedroom dresser in all of its shatteredness and beauty. And it begins that chapter and ends that short chapter. I also love what I say in that chapter about the difference between happiness and joy.
Yes.
Yeah, that happiness comes where you expect it. You go on vacation, you're happy. But joy has a mind of its own.
I express the difference by saying that joy is enduring, and you can cry from joy. But happiness...
I think more often probably I cry from joy. Probably more often, yeah.
Wow, yeah. And that happiness is if they have your flavor at the ice cream shop.
Exactly. I just got a little bit bigger tax refund than I expected, which is actually in the book. Of course, I didn't know that at the time I wrote it, but I'm talking about happiness. I said, happiness is when you go on vacation or get a bigger tax refund than you expected. Yeah, I was happy to get that tax refund. Had nothing to do with joy.
I am gonna make a suggestion, which is not what I'm supposed to do, but they asked me to do this. And it's that you explore the Japanese thing where they take the broken pieces and put them back together, but they deliberately use a color or a metallic so you can see all the cracks.
Yeah, kintsugi. Yeah, it's we did that at our church retreat a year and a half ago, and then painted all the cracks gold, and it is absolutely beautiful. I actually broke the bowl, but did not put the bowl back together. There was something stopping me from it, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was interesting to me. And I've had the same therapist since 1993. She's in New York. She's amazing and wonderful. And the next week, you can be sure I called her and said, "Oh, I think we should schedule a few sessions," because there was something hindering me from doing the work I needed to do.
Do you consider the book part of your ministry?
I do. I really do. I was not compelled to write a book. I really have written chapters of a lot of books. I wrote a book of stories in my previous life that I loved, but I didn't really have a lot of interest in writing a memoir. And when my agent first approached me, I was frankly interested in the income. And I had by then begun speaking a lot on issues related to gender equity. And so I said, sure, let's do a book on gender equity. And he said, or a memoir. And I said, okay. We can pitch both. And it was interesting because when it came down to it, the big publishing houses, some of them wanted a book that was about gender equity, and some wanted a memoir. And in the final analysis, it kind of came down to just two companies, and Simon & Schuster ended up bidding higher. And I'm actually really grateful, because they wanted a memoir, and I did not want to write a memoir. You tear your soul apart writing a memoir, but you also glue it back together with gold glue. It was for me a putting back together or finding beauty in broken pieces. And I had a wonderful editor. Michelle was just terrific. And she kept me at it, kept me going deeper and deeper. And what I realized I needed to write as I watched the polarization increase in America after 2016, I'm convinced that the only thing that'll bring us back together is a narrative story. You think about it, we don't sleep without dreaming, and I don't know anybody who dreams in mathematical equations. We dream in stories, weird stories. I had some weird ones last night, but stories nevertheless. And I think it's by hearing one another's stories that we can truly change the narrative. And so I wanted to tell a story that would help others understand the ways in which journey between genders is in fact part of the hero's journey, which I think we're all called to. The question is just how often and whether or not we answer the call. It always includes brokenness. It always includes time on the road of trials. It always includes time in a deep, dark cave. It always includes getting lost. And so in that regard, I feel like my book is a universal story. But I also have been hoping that some of those who are more conservative might read it and find in it my humanity. And instead of seeing me as a freak, which would be their definition of who I am and what I am, they would see me as a pretty normal human being, roughly as healthy or as unhealthy as they are. That to me is the hope in bringing us back together and seeing each other's humanity.
I don't know if I agree with your conclusion that they would all see you as a freak. And the reason I say that is because I wonder if we're at a point where even in the most conservative families, there's a Paula or a Duncan. And I don't think they want us, but they got us.
And I understand that, and yet there was a study that came out not long ago, fascinating study, behind why all these laws are being proposed, and now 9 have passed, taking away the civil rights of transgender kids. And they said it's not actually necessarily conservatives, that the study was done in the 10 states that were swing states, so including your state. And they interviewed Trump voters and asked them, should transgender people have the same civil rights as everybody else? 60% said yes. So that part of what you were saying is in fact exactly true. It said regardless of age, ethnicity, or socioeconomic group, or even political affiliation, 60% said that, who voted for Trump, said that we should have rights. They said the problem is that 84% of evangelical Christians are opposed to transgender rights. 84% of them believe that gender is immutably determined at birth. 61% of them believe that the nation has already gone much too far in granting civil rights to transgender people, and yet only 25% of whom have ever met someone who's transgender. And of course, you and I both know that statistic's not true. 100% of them have met someone who's transgender. It's just that they're not out yet.
Yeah. When you wrote the book, did you imagine it sitting in the hands of some of your former students, your friends, colleagues from your evangelical past?
Mm-hmm. Because, we as a species are plenty curious. And so I think curiosity will get the best of them. They're not going to walk in a bookstore and walk out with that, don't you know? One of their parishioners might see them. But they're going to order it and they're going to read it because they want to. I think that we deeply want to know about those whose experience is very different from our own. So yeah, I believe a lot of those folks are going to read this book.
I hope so.
I do.
I really hope so. I hear when you talk about even the statistics, which can't help but be painful, a real love for that community still.
I come out of a heritage known as the Stone Campbell movement, which actually in the 1820s has roots with the rootedness of the Unitarian Universalist movement, which is just a little bit of historical trivia. I love the UU. I've worked with a couple of UU fellowships here. But I have generations in that fellowship of independent Christian churches and churches of Christ. And I do love those people. And all of them have rejected me. I think I've heard in a nice way from around maybe 50 emails and such. I think I've met maybe 16 or 18 of them. And I think I've met 4 or 5 more than once. And I knew thousands and thousands of people. Mm-hmm. But I still love them. And I still speak of the independent Christian church, which was my denomination, as mine. I still say our religious fellowship. And yet, of course, none of them would allow me to preach in their churches, not a one of them. And I directed an organization that planted churches for a long time. We have a large church right here within a half hour of me that we planted, but I can tell you with great certainty they're not going to be having me preach. It's a church of probably 1,500 in average attendance on a Sunday, and they are not LGBTQ plus affirming, which of course is to me, it's a great regret that I stayed in that world for so long. I thought I could change it from within, and it wasn't fast enough, and I wish I had left earlier.
Wow. I took a ticket out rather early.
Yeah, well, I was comfortable.
Yeah.
I was very comfortable, had a good bit of power, entitlement, and privilege. And you don't give that up all that easily.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Let me see. I named our church Abundant Love. And in our greeting, we say we welcome your authentic self to join us in community-centered work. And I want to hear what Paula Stone Williams has to say. You talk a lot about authenticity, but I want to hear about the abundance part, because I hear it sort of, you lead people there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. We say our ethos before we begin every service at Left Hand Church. It was originally written by Mark Tidd before he started at Highlands Church in Denver, but it's married, divorced, and single here. It's one family that mingles here. Conservative and liberal here. We've all got to give a little here. Big and small here. There's room for us all here. Doubt and belief here. We all can receive here. LGBTQ and straight here. There is no hate here. Woman, non-binary, and man here. Everyone can hear. Whatever your race here, for all of us grace here. In imitation of the ridiculous love Almighty God has for each of us and all of us, let us live and love without labels. And I always slow down when I get to that last line, because I do believe that there is a ridiculous abundance of love that God has for us. I think the most important teaching Jesus ever gave was in his last day of public ministry, last time he met with the crowds at large when they asked him which of the laws were greatest, 613 of them. And he basically said, yes, three things. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. And I find it fascinating that from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. I think they were devastated by that answer. It was simple. It was devastatingly simple, because while it's simple, it is not easy.
The execution is kind of rough.
Yeah.
I
was saying to our people last week at church in my sermon, I said, I think the church is, outside of the family, the only institution whose primary purpose is to help us learn to be human together. And I do believe, in fact, that is one of the major purposes of the church, just to help us be human together, which is, of course, why every church on earth is so utterly, completely messed up. I'm sure, yours is 3 years old, so is mine. I bet yours is as messed up as mine is after 3 years.
I'm here to ask questions. That's what I'm going to do with that one.
Okay.
How did you find that church, or did they find you? And would you be all right if they used it in Sunday school, your book?
No, we actually have decided not to do a small group about it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I was on the regular preaching team at Highlands Church in Denver, and also preached somewhat regularly at Denver Community Church, two post-evangelical churches. And by post-evangelical, I mean that their style, their church governance, their worship is kind of like the big giant mega churches, but their doctrine, their theology would be much more mainline Protestant. And those two churches combined with my son's church, Forefront Church in Brooklyn, to start Left Hand. So we started with 3 co-pastors, and I'm the only one of the original 3 who remains, but we have 4 co-pastors now, all of us part-time, bivocational. And a lovely community of people in Longmont, Colorado. We meet every Sunday evening at 5 in the chapel of the UCC church in town. And we have that chapel 24/7, which is wonderful. We've decided not to do a study of it because I did talk about a very difficult year we had in our church where there was a lot of conflict. And I dearly love the people with whom there was the conflict. And I changed their names in the book. And I wrote as honestly and transparently as I could, and made sure that everything I wrote, that someone else who was there could verify exactly what happened. But it's painful, and I don't necessarily want to bring our community into a study of that particular chapter. And so that is probably the main reason I really wouldn't want to do it. I also think somehow it's not fair to my other co-pastors.
Okay.
Nicole Vicky is one of the co-pastors, and Nicole actually wrote the poem that precedes the introduction and actually helped me a lot in the writing of the book. But I don't feel like it's fair to Nicole or John or Christy, because then, right there in our church, it's all about me. And in reality, I think our people really do see us as four co-equals. And John and I do most of the preaching. Christy and Nicole are both amazing pastors. They just love people and people love them. And I don't think I want to mess with that magic that we have. Everybody's been very supportive of the book. I mean, that's been wonderful. Everybody's excited. They keep showing up. I asked them to come to the one of the bookstore events last night, and I see they were showing up tonight, and I'm sure they'll show up for some more. They're wonderful people, and we have a lot of people who don't live in Colorado. My TED Talks have gone all over the world. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of have a church that has people from all over the world, particularly that developed in COVID as we all were forced online.
I had a wonderful experience during my internship with youth because we were doing a deliberate sexual education thing. And I remember, and I'm looking at page 27, and you say, as I watched my girlfriends all delighted to see their bodies change, at least that's how I imagined it. I know that it's not, in fact, how most cisgender women experience their teen years. For most of them, it is a difficult time of self-consciousness. But I did not see it that way. I imagined that my female friends stood in front of the mirror for hours and admired their changing bodies. That was my fantasy. When a girl would complain about the changes in her body was experiencing, I wanted to cry out, then for God's sakes, trade places with me.
A lot of white male entitlement in that page.
A little bit. Yeah. But there's also a recognition, if you step back from it a little bit, of how horribly we're educating people about their own bodies, about sexuality, about the simple transition that we all have to go through called puberty. Is there something you want to say about that?
Oh, sure. I believe the church has done great evil on this subject, and it started with Augustine in the 4th century and continued right on through to the present day, certainly in the Catholic Church and in most evangelical and fundamentalist expressions, not just of Christianity, but of all of the desert religions, Judaism and Islam as well, in their fundamentalist expressions. And I think about the patriarchal leadership of all of those bodies. And if in fact, you as a religious leader want to have control, and the only person who can forgive sins is you, and you want everyone to have sins that need to be forgiven, well, then what better subject to choose than human sexuality? Particularly then, if you want to say that masturbation is a sin, oh my goodness, well now you're just going to have plenty of people to have to forgive and save from hell to keep you employed for the rest of your days and to keep your religious fellowship in its solid and steady place. You take a look at what Jesus had to say about sexuality, and it wasn't what the church says about sexuality. Talk about creating a power structure that was convenient for the patriarchy. And, I find it interesting when the bathroom law was passed in North Carolina in all of its absurdity. I pointed out that not one single trans person has ever been found in a bathroom for nefarious purposes. But at the same time, over one 20-year period, the 3 largest insurance companies in the United States that insure Protestant churches, not Catholic churches, Protestant churches, paid out 7,095 claims against clergy who abused parishioners in their churches. So you tell me where the risk lies. Is it with the trans folks who are just trying to go to the body? Or do we have problems with that kind of patriarchal leadership that then often is in that position for nefarious purposes? I'm not saying the majority. I don't even think it's a majority in the Catholic Church. But I think that the church has been a place for those with very unhealthy attitudes about sexuality to be in leadership positions. And I think, unfortunately, tragically, a lot of clergy have abused a lot of parishioners.
Certainly more than anybody's been threatened in a bathroom by anybody transgender.
Exactly. Or gay. The number of fundamentalists who still believe that that there's no real difference between being a gay male and a pedophile. It's like, oh my goodness, what is, is it 1952? It's just, I can't believe that.
I want to go back to the sexual development stuff, and I'm going to ask, because you got to be a parent and you were struggling then during your children's development. Do you feel like you did a better job?
Yeah, I think I did. My kids tell me that, and my youngest is 40. So, they're at this point, they've figured out pretty much their lives and have differentiated. They don't need to please me any longer. And so when they tell me that we did a good job on that one, I believe them. We started talking about sex as just, this is just life when they were just kids. I remember the very first time I ever talked with Jonathan somewhat seriously about male sexual functioning. I was running and he was riding his bicycle. And the more I talked about what happens with the male penis, the faster he rode. And I was running out of breath. And then he was so excited. He was 5. And so, you tell them as much as they're able to understand. So they really don't ever remember a time they didn't know these things.
Paula,
because I was told nothing. Oh, he asked questions. Yeah, he had plenty.
And so the bicycle running along thing was preceded by a question. I hope so.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We always would talk when I would run and he would ride. And it was, it was always kind of a precious time. And I think that, over the centuries, humans have learned more peripatetically. You used to walk around with your professor because I believe we think better that way. And so I believe that it was the motion that helped both of us get into a place where it was easy to have conversations. But I talk freely with the girls too. And I watch my kids talk freely with my granddaughters. And our church, it's a very important area for our church. Highlands uses the Our Whole Lives, the OWL program, which is a UCC program. And we actually use that as well. And a UU program. I was just going to say that. It was done, I think, in conjunction between the two. And I believe it's a marvelous program for teaching young people about their sexuality in a very affirming way.
And we got in trouble for that.
I do. Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
It is.
Because if you give them the information, they're going to do it.
It's, here's kind of the secret for the folks, and they're going to do it. We are inherently sexual beings, just as we are inherently spiritual beings. And in fact, our spirituality and sexuality are very, very closely intertwined. So intertwined, you cannot separate the two. They are working from the same part of the human soul. Let me ask you just a question. No matter what culture, age, language, ethnicity, there is one phrase spoken universally at the point of climax. It is some variation of, oh God. So tell me that doesn't indicate that our sexuality and spirituality are not in fact closely intertwined. You said we were going to have fun.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. I think because you've done so many interviews, I'm going to ask ER if we can give you a moment to get a glass of water and check in on the questions.
Sure, I've got some iced tea right here, so I'll just do that.
ER, do you really think that's iced tea? Or is that bourbon with a big old thing of lemon in it? We're in the South, we know iced tea.
It is not sweet tea. Sweet tea I love. But yeah, there's a lot of calories in sweet tea. Sweet tea is my favorite drink on earth, as a matter of fact.
Mine too, but it is not an everyday drink anymore.
Yeah, not anymore.
So we do have one question from the audience. So Julie asks, in what specific ways would a hierarchical power structure work better than the flat power structure you mentioned in the book?
You know, I thought for a while post-transition that flat leadership structures were preferable, and that in fact vertically based leadership structures were just a remnant of the patriarchy and actually worked against good human solution making. I actually don't think I believe that in the same way I once did. I believe that a lot of organizations, corporations particularly, do tend to work better if there is a CEO, a place the buck stops. But I think it's tragic when that person does not have paradoxical strengths that are rarely found. Henry Nouwen, the theologian, said the greatest leaders of all time had equal parts confidence and humility. You know, I'm very fascinated by what happened in the early days of COVID. You had 6 countries that did extremely well: Finland, Norway, Germany, Iceland, Taiwan, and New Zealand, all with a female head of state. And you had 3 countries that did spectacularly poorly: the United States, Brazil, and Great Britain, all with a male with great ego need and not a lot of ego strength. We'll just put it that way. And I think you look at those women, they were in fact alpha leaders. They were in fact in top-down systems, but they had no difficulty working collaboratively. They had no difficulty compromising, and most importantly, they had no difficulty admitting when they were wrong. I find that alpha leaders are important in the world, but I also have a predisposition toward, maybe a prejudice, in favor of alpha female leaders. I think the vast majority of the time, they are not the devil wears Prada. I think the vast majority of the time, they are in fact very balanced leaders, including one who was portrayed as the devil wears Prada, Hillary Clinton. I feel like, you know, in your state, it was my privilege once to very briefly meet Stacey Abrams at 10 Women, and just her presence backstage. You know, I want her in charge of something. I don't want her in a flat leadership model. She could be in charge of your state. That'd be fine by me. In fact, I think probably she might, in fact, actually should have been, if all things had been fair and even. I think it works out nicely for the nation, actually, that she ended up focusing on voter issues instead. But, you know, I think she's the perfect example of great confidence coupled with great humility.
Yes. So one of the things we were talking about before we came on camera was about E.O. Wilson's research. And it got me to thinking, you know, when you lose some of your original foundational sacred texts, you have to replace them with new texts. And obviously, as a bookseller, I'm predisposed to be curious about people's sacred texts. So are there new texts that you found that you would consider foundational for your theology today?
Oh, that's a marvelous question. I think all of the writers who rightly noted that Christianity particularly is at a 500-year turning point, and that we're seeing 3 major shifts. We're seeing a shift from orthodoxy to orthopraxy, from right belief to right practice, from believing the right things about biblical doctrine to loving each other well. That we are moving, second, away from God as the eternal threatener, the one who constantly threatens every generation, and God as the ultimate suffering participant, the one who came to earth to dwell among us and to show solidarity with us in our suffering. And we're seeing the church move away from being a place to protect itself from the culture at large, to existing for the common good. And the writers who have helped me the most with that would be the late Phyllis Tickle, certainly the work of Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr, a Franciscan. His Falling Upward was fundamental in my decision to transition. I told him that when I was in a small group that was studying with him for a few days. Brian McLaren, who wrote one of the pieces for my book, he an endorsement for my book. He is another who's written eloquently about that and the great spiritual migration, the Universal Christ that Richard Rohr wrote. Those are very meaningful to me, as well as James Hollis, rather. James Hollis's work, a Jungian therapist. And of course, any Jungian analyst is going to be writing about spiritual matters. If you're a Jungian analyst, you're going to write about spiritual matters. And his most recent 2 books have been highly helpful to me. Living Together is the most recent. The one before that, I cannot offhand think of the title of.
Because we're being sponsored by Charis, I'm going to push you a little, because some of the audience wants to know, who would you embrace as a feminist writer that you love?
I'm not sure that I have an adequate answer to that.
Okay.
I love the Feminist Fight Club. And I love Joan Williams' What Works for Women at Work. I had the privilege of speaking at a TEDx event with Joan Williams. And God, she's fierce. She's focused more now on class issues and how they affect our culture at large. But I've not read anything recently in that area. More of my recent reading has been theological, because I'm pastoring a new church. Yeah, I'll think about that. We'll go off the air and I'll get in bed, and then like 3 of them will come to me right away.
And I want to recommend The Disabled God, because...
Oh, yes, I actually read that book.
And I got to meet her before she passed. She passed while I was at Candler. And I got phenomenal.
To meet her too. I used to work with a company that had homes for individuals with disabilities, and oh God, she was amazing. I was able to meet her at a conference in Milwaukee once. Yeah, that was a marvelous book.
And ER, this is when I hate Zoom, because if we were in Charis, we could go, oh,
grab them. I know, I do too. It's frustrating.
Paula, right here.
I know. I'm trying to capture all of these, and I'll try and put links in the YouTube write-up. So
and I did think of one more, and she actually also wrote a thing for my book, Rage Becomes Her: The Power of Women's Anger. But I don't know how to pronounce her name. Soraya Shamali, I think. Might be right. But yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. Well, I also was curious, you have a wonderful come to Jesus moment in your book while you're watching Lost, the television show.
I did.
And I love that show, and I think it's a wonderful show. And I watched it during the pandemic, which it felt appropriately existential to watch during the pandemic. And so I was just thinking about the role that unexpected media can play in our spiritual and emotional lives. And so I was wondering if, I want folks to buy the book, so not necessarily recount that specific story, but if you could, sort of talk about what it means to recognize yourself in the story of someone who's not you. And Jack's life doesn't quite parallel yours, but what is it?
Oh, actually, a lot. I think the left brain, a scientifically minded fact checker that he was, and of course in that show, the male character who was not at all that was named John Locke, which of course was just a play, because Jack was in fact very Lockean, and Locke was in fact very not Lockean. But yeah, Lost for me Like if I had a dream person I would want to sit down with, it'd be two people. It'd be Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, who were the showrunners for that show, because I think it was utterly and absolutely brilliant. And there comes a point, for those of you who haven't watched it, in the final season, you don't realize until the very last hour of the last show. And I'm there. I mean, I'm going to let you in on a secret. I think it makes the final season easier. There are two parallel stories going on in the final season. There's one that's in real time on an island, and there's one that would be what a nice liberal Catholic would call a delightful explanation of what some kind of a purgatory would be like, a place that we might go after we die, where we're working out the things that need to be worked out before we can move on to a heaven. And that both of those things are happening, and you don't realize till the very end which is which. But there comes a point on the island in the final season. If you were a Lost fan, it's when Jack. Oh, I'm getting chills. When Jack was at the lighthouse and saw his childhood home, where he realizes he's been called to be the next Jacob, and Jacob is the God figure in the show. And I knew then that he would die, and I knew that the show would end with the same scene with which it began, or I certainly thought it was possible, and was thrilled when that was the case. And actually, when we were in Hawaii, Kathy took a picture of me in a bamboo forest of that same scene, which no one shall see except me. Yeah, I think we discover ourselves in the stories of others. I think, in my experience, cis women might have a little bit better ability to be in touch with their soul than cis men. And I always found it easier to get to my heart through movies or long form television. And that was my call. That was the point at which I knew I was called to die. I knew I was called to transition. It was 2 more years before I started hormones because, life is life. And I had to be lost for a while. And like I say in the book, lost is a place too. You have to be there sometimes. But for me, that was the point where I knew, oh my God, I can't keep not answering the call. And you know what that's like. I mean, you experienced it in your own life. You both have.
I'm trying not to join you in crying. Because I got lost.
Yeah, I mean, I just love, we even thought about naming the book Lost as a Place Too. I think there are things you learn in the place called Lost you can't learn anyplace else. I love the end of Rilke's poem, The Man Watching. It says, winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by ever greater beings. I just love that.
Well, and I think it's a very relatable feeling that I suspect many people are experiencing right now, because many people feel very lost and uncertain as to what the next phase of our lives are going to be, or our culture is going to be. And, many people who had businesses, or their businesses are no longer what they once were, or had, churches, they no longer are what they once were.
It's their whole sense of identity.
Yeah. And so
for more than a year, we have been at home.
Yeah.
Without those.
So this moment of recognizing this liminal place as a legitimate place to pause and not just rush through it, but to really sit with that feeling of being lost and feel it, I think is really valuable and important. And, trans people know a lot about liminality, right? And I think that's something that is a secret gift of transness, to experience liminality and to sit with the fear that generates in ourselves and in others, and understand it as actually a spiritual gift as opposed to a negative, because it can feel certainly like a negative when you're experiencing it. But I got that sense in your book as well. That
yeah, and as you say that, I'm suddenly struck that I'm a pastoral counselor by trade. That's what my doctorate's in. And every one of my clients did incredible work during this time period. During this liminal space, they made the kind of moves forward you generally would not see in a typical year. I think they were able to do that soul work. I really hadn't put that together till this moment. Of course, I'm always thinking it's just because they have a brilliant therapist. In reality, I work from person-centered therapy, and so the assumption there is that the answer is in your client. And your job is not to give them answers. Your job is simply to help them remove the obstacles that are stopping from getting them where they need to go. And I realize that being in that quiet space has allowed so many of them to do exactly that. And I think now they're better able to re-enter the world.
Time and opportunity.
Yeah.
I want to ask something because you took us there, ER. And it's, Paula, coming out of this, we hope we're coming out of this epidemic, or at least coming into a safer way of dealing with it. Why don't we say that? Because it's still around the world.
Right.
And I have some ideas in my head, but they didn't ask me to preach, so I'm trying to ask you a question. What do you want to say to people about the coming to, or the coming out of, and what they might have to look forward to?
I believe this is for all of us an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. I think the call into the hero's journey is a universal call. I mean, Joseph Campbell talked a lot about it. It always has the same elements. An ordinary citizens called on an extraordinary journey into the road of trials. And initially they reject the call because, hey, it's the road of trials. And then a spiritual guide comes into their life, a Yoda, who gives them the courage to answer the call. And then they find themselves in a deep, dark cave where the true way is wholly lost. What John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, what Dante was talking about at the beginning of the Divine Comedy when he said, in the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost. And then eventually you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this time it's not an oncoming train. And now you're back on the ordinary road of trials and you think, oh, this is nothing. And now you're ready to head on to the Holy Grail, to the prize of great price. And of course, we all know the hero's journey doesn't end there. It doesn't end until you bring that back as an offering and give it to those from whom you have departed. I think that we all need to see this as a time where we now see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not an oncoming train. And we've had this time to be quiet and recognize that there is a call on our lives. And now that we're back on the ordinary road of trials, we can see clearly, what is that Holy Grail to which we are called? What is that pearl of great price that we are to find and then bring back as an offering to those from whom we have departed?
Now, see, you're evangelical, so if I get up and I start running around shouting now, you'll be all right with that. ER won't understand, but you will.
I'm post-evangelical, so I will have a body memory of that, and it will be fine.
Thank you so much.
Paula, I would love to leave with some advice for our community. I co-facilitate a group for parents of gender creative children. And these are wonderful parents who love their kids and are really working very hard to skill up to be there for their children. And one of the things I've said to them is, the number one thing is that you're there and that you love your kids. But if you were to give advice to the parents of 5 to 10-year-old gender creative and trans children who are on board, who are loving, who come from a diverse background of faiths, but have done the reconciling they mostly need to do to be in the room at the very least, is there something you would like those folks to think about or carry with them?
I think there are two things. One is broader and one is quite specific. Broader, I think, just to always keep in their minds that gender nonconforming, gender curious children whose parents are not supportive have a 13 times higher suicide attempt rate than their peers. Remember that. And then the very specific instruction I would give is more instruction as a pastoral counselor. When it comes to issues related to their gender identity, let the child lead. Don't get in front of them. Because I notice some parents of children who identify as transgender are just gung-ho. Okay, let's just do everything we can, and let's even push the envelope on medical treatment. And trust your endocrinologist, trust your pediatrician on this point. Unless you happen to live in Arkansas, in which case, get the hell out of your state, and then trust your new endocrinologist and pediatrician. But let the child lead, because children have to differentiate. I mean, it's a critical part of what they do. And we see they've always chosen different ways and different themes in that differentiation process. And I find it's marvelous that now gender is one of the areas they can explore. But exploring their gender, where they are at 10, 11, may not be where they are at 18. Now, I will say there's one caveat to that. If you have a child who persistently from age 3 or 4, like I have a neighbor, wonderful parents, whose daughter's first words were identified as male at birth, were "Mommy, I a girl." That child who, even at 3 or 4 or 5, is showing suicidal ideation, that kid you don't have to worry about. That child is trans. That child's going to be trans when they're 18. But for the others, where there's a lot more curiosity, I don't think I would have known with certainty when I was 10. I would have loved the opportunity to just explore both. I kind of like being a boy sometimes. When I found out that the gender fairy didn't exist and I couldn't be changed into a girl, I didn't hate being a boy. But I also know that by probably, in my case, I think by 15, it would have been, no, I'm casting my lot here. I would have known that, but I would have loved the chance to just live in that liminal space between genders during those years.
Yes, I think, one of the things that we often talk about is the need to really allow kids to play, that gender can be play. And if people don't associate it so much with sexuality, which unfortunately is one of the things that the church has done, is bring sex into it in a way that children are not bringing sex into it. That the children can really try on many things and come to a sense of self that is organic and healthy and positive. And
Right.
yeah, I appreciate that.
And ER, I want to broaden that and say it's all right for some adults to play with gender.
Yes.
And it might be healing to go ahead and put those high heels on. Not that I ever have.
We're going to unearth some of Duncan's pictures from the 80s. So.
No, we are not.
Well, this has just been really delightful, and it's lovely to read all of the comments from all of you watching from home. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Paula, so much for this book. I know it
my goodness.
Mean a lot to many people, and really, I think my hope is that there will be other people who are, later in their journey who read your book and have a come to Jesus lost moment from reading this book and live in their own authentic truth. So that is definitely my hope. But I also just hope it reaches a really wide audience, because I think it's going to help a lot of folks. So thank you. And thank you, as always, Duncan, for being a part of Charis and for being your authentic self in all of the ways that
I wanted to leave Paula with something that I had copy of David Coupe's story. He was the first out NFL football player. And I hid it under my mattress or all over my bedroom so my parents wouldn't find it. And it saved my life. And I know your book is going to get hidden in places where it's going to save some lives.
I hope so. Nicole's poem at the beginning of the book alludes to that, and it's part of why I wanted to include it in the book. Thank you. Thank you both so much. This has been delightful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.